party was grand that evening. The golden lights from the chandeliers filled every corner of the mansion, bouncing off the polished marble floors and sparkling glasses. Expensive perfumes mixed with the smell of wine and roasted meat, and laughter echoed through the large hall. The guests, politicians, businessmen, and socialites, were dressed in their finest clothes, chatting and boasting about their achievements. Among them sat Mr. Alden Graves, the host of the night. He was a tall man with sharp eyes and an expression that rarely softened. Everyone in the city knew him. The millionaire who built his fortune from scratch but had become cold and proud over the years. People admired him, but few truly liked him. To most, he was a symbol of power and arrogance. While the orchestra played softly in the background, a small group of volunteers entered the mansion. They were from a local charity that helped orphaned children. The group hoped to convince Mr. Graves to make a donation. Among them stood a young girl, Emily, about 8 years old, with fiery red hair and big curious eyes. She wore a simple green dress and old brown boots that looked a little too big for her. Emily wasn't supposed to be there that night. The matron of the orphanage had brought her because no one could look after her while the volunteers were out. Emily stayed close to the matron, quiet and observant, her small hands clutching the edge of her coat. When the volunteers approached Mr. Graves, they spoke politely, explaining their cause. "Sir, if you could spare a small donation, it would mean so much to the children," the matron said. Mr. Graves leaned back in his chair, half listening, his glass of wine swirling lazily in his hand. He wasn't interested. He never was. Then his eyes fell on Emily. "And who's this?" he asked with a smirk. The room quieted slightly. The matron quickly replied, "Oh, she's one of the children from our home, sir. She's just here with us for the evening." A few guests nearby chuckled softly. "She looks frightened," one of them whispered. Mr. Graves gave a cold laugh. "Do you know what this house costs to maintain in a week, little one?" he asked mockingly. Emily looked up at him, unsure how to answer. "More than your whole orphanage probably spends in a year," he added, making the guests laugh louder. The matron tried to end the conversation politely, but Mr. Graves wasn't done. His eyes fell on the grand piano in the corner of the room, a black, glossy Steinway that gleamed under the chandelier's glow. He suddenly grinned and said loud enough for everyone to hear, "Tell you what, if this little girl can play that piano, I'll adopt her myself." The room erupted in laughter. Some guests clapped playfully, others shook their heads, amused by the absurd challenge. It was clearly a joke, a rich man's way of mocking both the child and the charity. Emily's face turned pale. She didn't understand why everyone was laughing, but she knew they were laughing at her. Her heart pounded. She had played on old broken pianos at the orphanage before, but never something so beautiful. Never in front of so many people. The matron whispered, "Don't worry, dear. You don't have to," but Emily's eyes went back to the piano. Something inside her wanted to prove them wrong. Maybe it was pride. Maybe it was the memory of her mother, who used to hum melodies when times were hard. Emily slowly stepped forward, her small boots tapping on the marble floor. The laughter began to fade as everyone turned to watch. Mr. Graves raised an eyebrow. "Well, well," he said mockingly. "The little orphan has courage. Let's see what she can do." She stopped beside the piano and gently ran her fingers over the keys, feeling their smoothness. Her reflection stared back from the shiny surface. A small girl in a simple dress surrounded by men in suits and women in jewels. For a second she wanted to run, but she took a deep breath. The guests whispered among themselves. Some felt uncomfortable now. The joke was turning serious. A man near the back muttered, "Poor thing, she's just a child." But Emily didn't hear them. She closed her eyes, remembering the tune her mother used to sing before bedtime, soft and warm like a promise. She pressed one key, then another. The first sound from the piano echoed gently through the room, clear and pure. The chatter stopped completely. Even Mr. Graves leaned forward slightly, his mocking smile fading. The girl continued, her fingers uncertain but heartfelt. The melody was simple yet filled with emotion. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. So real that it cut through the air like truth itself. When the final note faded, the silence was heavy. No one laughed anymore. Emily's small hands trembled and she stepped back quietly. Mr. Graves looked at her, lost for words. For the first time that evening, there was no arrogance in his eyes, only surprise. The guests exchanged glances. The atmosphere had changed. Something unexpected had just happened in that room full of wealth and pride, and while no one said it aloud, everyone felt it. The millionaire's cruel joke had turned into something he couldn't control. What began as mockery was slowly becoming the start of something far greater, a test of conscience, a challenge to the heart. Emily didn't win applause. She didn't ask for it. She just looked at Mr. Graves once, her expression calm and honest, as if saying, "You wanted to see me play. I did." And in that quiet, golden-lit hall, the proud millionaire realized this was no ordinary child. Emily stood there, her small fingers still trembling from the last note she had played. The grand hall was silent, and all eyes were still fixed on her. For a few long seconds, no one moved, not even Mr. Graves, the man who had mocked her just moments ago. Then, as if waking from a dream, the guests began to whisper softly among themselves. Some looked ashamed, others simply amazed. Emily didn't really understand what had just happened. All she knew was that the music had carried her somewhere else, to a place where she wasn't just a poor orphan in a borrowed dress. When she played, she felt close to her mother again, the woman whose gentle voice had once filled their small home before life had taken her away. The matron hurried to Emily's side and gently placed a hand on her shoulder. "It's all right, dear," she whispered, her voice shaking with pride. "You did beautifully." Emily nodded silently, still unsure how to feel. Her heart was racing. She didn't know if the man would laugh again or if he'd keep his promise. She didn't even want to be adopted by someone like him. She just wanted to play, to show that her music meant something even if no one cared. Mr. Graves finally stood up. His sharp eyes, which had once held nothing but arrogance, now seemed lost in thought. He didn't speak right away. The silence stretched until one of the guests tried to lighten the mood with an awkward chuckle. But the sound quickly faded. No one dared interrupt the strange tension in the air. "Who taught you to play?" he finally asked, his voice quieter than before. Emily looked up at him. "My mama," she said softly, "before she went to heaven." The words hit him harder than he expected. He blinked, turned away for a second, and took a deep breath. The guests watched, whispering behind their hands. This was not the reaction they had imagined from the cold, unfeeling millionaire. Mr. Graves cleared his throat and waved a hand dismissively. "That will be all," he said, but his voice lacked the confidence it once had. "Thank you for the performance." The matron gave a polite nod and led Emily away from the center of the hall. The party resumed, or at least tried to. The laughter was forced, the music didn't sound as joyful, and even the champagne didn't sparkle quite the same. Something had changed in the air. As they left the mansion, Emily looked back one last time. Through the tall windows, she could see Mr. Graves standing by the piano, staring at it as though seeing it for the first time. Later that night, as rain began to fall outside, Emily sat by her small bed at the orphanage. The matron tucked her in and smiled softly. "You made us all proud today," she said. "That was very brave." Emily yawned but didn't smile. "Do you think he really meant it?" she asked sleepily. The matron hesitated. "No, dear," she said gently. "Sometimes grown-ups say things they don't mean." Emily nodded, her eyes drooping. Before falling asleep, she whispered, "I didn't want him to adopt me. I just wanted to play one more time for Mama." The matron brushed a strand of hair from her forehead. "Then you did exactly what your mama would have wanted." As the girl drifted off, the rain pattered softly against the window, like faint piano notes in the dark. Meanwhile, Mr. Graves sat alone in his study, long after the last guest had gone. The room smelled of cigar smoke and old books. The fire burned low, throwing flickering shadows on the walls. His butler entered quietly to ask if he needed anything, but Mr. Graves waved him away. He poured himself another drink but didn't touch it. His mind was still filled with the image of the little girl, her nervous hands, her trembling voice, and the honest way she said, "My mama." It had been years since anyone had spoken to him like that. Most people either feared him or flattered him, but that child, she hadn't tried to please him. She had simply been herself. He looked toward the grand piano visible through the doorway. It had been years since he had played it. Once upon a time, when he was a boy, music had been his escape. His mother had taught him before his father forbade wasting time on such nonsense. Father forbade wasting time on such nonsense. Eventually, he gave it up, trading dreams for money, emotions for ambition. Now the sound of Emily's song haunted him. He could still hear it echoing faintly in his mind, raw, innocent, full of something he had forgotten existed, feeling. He leaned back in his chair and stared at the ceiling. "What have I done to myself?" he murmured. The next morning the sun broke through the clouds, but Mr. Graves didn't feel the usual rush to get to his office. For once, business could wait. He found himself walking through the city streets unnoticed, wearing a plain coat and hat. His driver followed at a distance, confused but obedient. He stopped in front of the orphanage gate. The building was small, old and worn down, a place most rich men would pass without a glance. But to him it suddenly felt important. Inside, the children were playing, laughing despite their worn clothes and simple toys. And there she was, Emily, sitting by a cracked old piano, pressing its broken keys and humming softly. Mr. Graves stood at the doorway for a long moment, watching her. She hadn't seen him yet, but the same melody from the night before filled the room, still pure, still honest. For the first time in years, Alden Graves smiled. Not the polite smile of a businessman, but a real one. And in that moment he understood something simple yet powerful, that sometimes, even the smallest act of sincerity can awaken a heart that money has long kept asleep. He took a deep breath, straightened his coat, and stepped inside. The story that had begun as a cruel joke was about to take a turn no one expected, not even him. The morning sun streamed through the orphanage window, casting golden stripes across the dusty floor. Emily sat at the old piano again, her feet barely touching the ground, softly pressing the worn-out keys. The tune she played was quiet but full of feeling, a melody she made up herself, something that sounded like both sadness and hope mixed together. The matron watched her from across the room, folding laundry. Every now and then she smiled to herself. Emily had always been different from the other children, quiet, thoughtful, and full of music. No matter how hard life was, Emily's way of coping was always the same. She played. Outside, a black car stopped at the gate. The matron didn't notice it at first. The engine went silent and a tall man in a long coat stepped out. He stood still for a moment, staring at the building as if uncertain whether to enter. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes were not as cold as before. It was Mr. Alden Graves. He had spent most of the night thinking about the little girl who played the piano at his party. Her song had replayed in his mind over and over. He tried to distract himself with paperwork, then with the news, but nothing worked. He even sat down at his own grand piano in the mansion, but when he placed his fingers on the keys, nothing came out. He realized something that scared him. The child had awakened something he had buried for years, the ability to feel. When the matron opened the door and saw him standing there, she gasped. "Mr. Graves, this is unexpected." "I suppose it is," he said with an awkward half-smile. "May I come in?" "Of course," she said, stepping aside. The children inside grew quiet when they saw the stranger. His expensive coat and polished shoes looked out of place among their simple clothes and bare feet. Emily turned her head. When she saw him, her eyes widened slightly. She didn't speak. She just waited. Mr. Graves walked slowly toward her. The children whispered to each other, wondering what was happening. He stopped near the piano and looked down at her. "You remember me?" he asked softly. "Yes, sir," Emily replied. He nodded, unsure what to say next. He had come here with a plan, to offer a donation, maybe to apologize. But standing there in front of her, his rehearsed words disappeared. "I owe you something," he said finally. "Last night I made a joke I shouldn't have. You played beautifully. I wasn't expecting that." Emily tilted her head. "You don't have to owe me anything," she said quietly. "I didn't do it for you." Her answer surprised him. For a moment he didn't know whether to feel insulted or impressed. He laughed softly, a real laugh this time. "No, I suppose you didn't," he said. "You did it because you love it," she nodded. "It's all I have of my mama." The matron stepped forward, ready to end the conversation before it became too emotional. But Mr. Graves raised his hand slightly. "It's all right," he said. Then he turned back to Emily. "Would you play something again?" "Just once more." Emily hesitated. The piano was old. Half the keys didn't work, and it made strange sounds sometimes. But the way he asked, not like a command but like a request, made her agree. She nodded and placed her small fingers on the keys. The room went silent. Even the other children stopped whispering. The notes that came out were uneven but full of heart. The broken keys couldn't hide the beauty of the tune. It wasn't fancy or complex, but there was truth in it, the kind of truth only a child could express. Mr. Graves stood still, watching her closely. His mind drifted back to when he was a boy, sitting beside his own mother as she taught him to play. He remembered how her hands guided his, how she used to say, "Music isn't about notes. It's about what you feel when you play them." He hadn't thought of that in decades. When Emily finished, she looked up shyly. "I know it's not perfect," she said, "but I try." Mr. Graves smiled faintly. "No," he said. "It was perfect, well, in the way that matters." He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small envelope. "I came here to make a donation," he said to the matron. "For the children, for better instruments, books, and maybe a new piano." The matron's eyes filled with tears. "That's incredibly kind, sir," she said softly. But he wasn't done. He looked at Emily again, and something in his expression changed. Gentler, warmer. "I also came to ask something," he said. "You remember what I said last night? About adopting you if you could play?" Emily looked down, unsure what to say. "You were joking," she whispered. "I was," he admitted. "But maybe I shouldn't have been." The room went completely still. The matron gasped quietly, covering her mouth. Mr. Graves knelt down so he was at Emily's eye level. "I don't want to make promises I can't keep," he said softly. "But would you like to come visit my home? Just to see if you'd feel comfortable there? No pressure." Emily blinked in surprise. "I don't know," she said truthfully. "It's very big. I might get lost," he chuckled. "Then I'll make sure you don't." The matron, still emotional, nodded slowly. "If that's what Emily wants, we can arrange it." Emily thought for a moment, looking at the broken piano, then at the man who once laughed at her. Something in his eyes was different now, not mocking, not proud, but kind. She gave a small nod. "Okay," she said. "I'll visit." Mr. Graves smiled, the kind of smile that comes from deep inside, the kind that feels like the first sunlight after a long winter. As he left the orphanage, he glanced back one last time. Emily waved shyly before sitting back down at the piano, starting to play again. The melody followed him all the way to his car, echoing softly like a promise, and though he didn't yet know it, that small visit would change both their lives forever. Mr. Graves's mansion had never felt so quiet. The grand halls, once filled with laughter from his wealthy guests, now seemed hollow and cold. The servants moved silently, careful not to disturb their master. But something had changed in Mr. Graves since that night at the orphanage. He no longer looked at his piano with disdain or walked past it like a forgotten decoration. Now every time he entered the room, he remembered the sound of Emily's fragile, honest notes, the ones that had somehow reached places in his heart he thought were long dead. He couldn't stop thinking about her. The image of the small girl sitting on the edge of the piano bench, playing with all her heart, returned to him again and again. Her eyes, clear and steady, had no fear. They had truth, a kind of bravery he had never seen in adults, including himself. That evening, as the rain tapped softly against the tall windows, he sat in front of his grand piano once more. His fingers hovered over the keys. For years he hadn't played. Business had become his music, money his rhythm. But now, when he pressed a single note, it felt strange, like waking a sleeping part of himself. The melody that came out was broken and uncertain. He played slower than he used to, missing notes, fumbling with his timing. But as he continued, the sound began to soften, to breathe. It wasn't perfect, but it was honest, something he had forgotten how to be. He stopped suddenly, closing his eyes. Emily's voice echoed in his head. "I didn't do it for you." He smiled faintly, whispering to himself, "No, you didn't." A week later, Mr. Graves returned to the orphanage, this time unannounced. The children were outside playing in the yard, chasing each other in circles. Emily was sitting beneath a tree, sketching something in the dirt with a stick. When she saw him, she blinked in surprise, then stood up quickly. "Hello again," he said, smiling gently. "You came back," she replied softly. "I did," he said. "I don't break promises, not anymore." The matron came out soon after, wiping her hands on her apron. She greeted him politely but with some confusion. "Mr. Graves, we weren't expecting you so soon." He nodded. "I know. I just wanted to speak with Emily, and with you, of course. They invited him inside into a small office that smelled faintly of old paper and tea. He looked around at the cracked walls and worn furniture. The place was humble, but it felt alive, filled with laughter and kindness, things his mansion lacked. I've been thinking, he began, about my offer. I wasn't sure if I was serious at first, but now I am. The matron's eyes widened slightly. You mean, yes, he said firmly. I'd like to adopt her properly. Emily froze. Her stick dropped from her hand. You really want me to live with you? She asked quietly. He knelt down so he could meet her eyes. Only if you want to. I know my home is big and strange. But it's empty, Emily. It could use some real music again. She didn't answer right away. She looked down at her shoes, scuffed and dusty, then back up at his face. His eyes weren't cold anymore. They were warm, almost gentle, like the way her mother used to look at her before bedtime. After a moment, she whispered, Okay, but only if I can still come here sometimes. He chuckled. You'll be free to visit whenever you like. The matron's eyes filled with tears. Emily, she said softly, this is a wonderful opportunity. Are you sure? Emily nodded. He kept his promise, she said. 2 days later, a black car came to the orphanage once again, this time to take Emily home. The children gathered at the gate, waving as she climbed into the car. She pressed her face against the window, smiling through tears. When they reached the mansion, Emily's eyes widened. The gates opened slowly, revealing a world she had never imagined. Gardens stretched as far as she could see, with fountains that sparkled in the sunlight. Inside, crystal chandeliers hung from the ceilings and paintings lined the walls. But what caught her attention most was the piano, the same one she had played before, still gleaming under the chandelier. She walked toward it slowly, almost afraid to touch it. It's yours now, Mr. Graves said softly from behind her. You can play it any time you want. She turned around. Really? He nodded. Really. This house has been silent for too long. Emily sat down, her fingers gently resting on the keys. She pressed one, then another, and soon the hall was filled with her music again. Warm, full of feeling, alive. The servants stopped what they were doing to listen. Even the air seemed to lighten. Mr. Graves stood by the doorway, his hands folded behind his back. He watched her quietly, a faint smile on his face. Something inside him, something he thought had died long ago, began to heal. When she finished playing, she turned to him and said, It sounds better here. He chuckled. That's because this house was waiting for you. Emily tilted her head. Do you play too? His smile faded slightly. I used to, a long time ago. Then play with me, she said innocently. He hesitated. I don't know if I remember how. Then we'll remember together, she said with a grin. For a moment he didn't move. But then he walked slowly toward her, sat beside her on the bench and placed his hands on the keys. The first few notes were clumsy, uneven. Emily giggled softly. You're not very good, she teased playfully. He laughed, a sound that surprised even him. You're right, he said, but I'm learning. And so, side by side, the millionaire and the little orphan began to play. The music they made wasn't perfect, but it filled the mansion with something far greater than perfection. It filled it with life, laughter, and love. That night, for the first time in many years, Alden Graves slept peacefully. The echo of Emily's laughter and the sound of the piano drifted through his dreams, wrapping his lonely heart in a warmth he had almost forgotten existed. The next morning, the mansion woke up to a sound it hadn't heard in years. Laughter. Not the shallow kind that came from parties or fake compliments, but real laughter. Light, pure, and full of life. Emily's laughter. She was running down the long marble hallway, her tiny footsteps echoing against the high ceiling. A golden-haired maid named Clara smiled as she hurried after her. Miss Emily, slow down, dear. You'll slip. Emily giggled, spinning in her green dress. But everything here is so big. It feels like a castle. From his study, Mr. Graves watched with quiet amusement. He had been buried in papers since morning, trying to catch up on business matters, but Emily's voice kept breaking through the silence like sunshine sneaking through a storm cloud. For the first time in years, he didn't mind being interrupted. He leaned back in his chair, closing the file he had been reading. So this is what joy sounds like, he thought. It was strange how quickly the house had changed. Or maybe it was he who had changed. Later that day, he found Emily in the music room again. She was sitting on the piano bench, her legs swinging freely, humming as she played random notes. A plate of cookies sat beside her, half-eaten. Mr. Graves walked in quietly, but Emily noticed him right away. "You were working again, weren't you?" she asked with a little frown. He raised an eyebrow. "How did you know?" "You always look serious when you come from that room," she said matter-of-factly. "You should smile more." He chuckled, shaking his head. "You sound like my mother. Was she nice?" He hesitated for a moment before replying. "Yes," he said softly. "She was very kind. She used to play piano too." Emily's eyes lit up. "Just like me." "Exactly like you," he said, smiling faintly. "She taught me my first song." Emily thought for a moment, then asked, "Will you teach me that song?" He blinked, caught off guard. "It's been a very long time. I might not remember it," she grinned. "Then we can figure it out together." He sighed playfully but sat down beside her. "You don't take no for an answer, do you?" "Nope," she said proudly, and so they began. His hands trembled slightly as he touched the keys, his memory searching for the melody buried deep within him. Slowly the notes came back, hesitant at first, but then smoother, warmer. Emily followed along, listening carefully, mimicking the rhythm. After a few minutes, they were both smiling. The tune wasn't perfect, but it was beautiful in its own imperfect way. When the last note faded, Emily looked up and said softly, "It sounds like something happy and sad at the same time." Mr. Graves nodded. "That's exactly what it is." She tilted her head. "What's it called?" He smiled wistfully. "My mother used to call it home." Emily's eyes softened. "Then I like it even more." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The air felt peaceful, gentle like a promise. Days turned into weeks, and Emily's presence changed the mansion completely. The servants, who once moved quietly and spoke in whispers, began to smile more often. The rooms that had gathered dust were now bright and alive. Emily talked to everyone, even the old gardener who had worked there for decades but had never spoken much. Mr. Graves began to notice small things he hadn't in years. The sound of birds outside his window, the smell of morning coffee, the simple pleasure of sitting by the fire and listening to someone talk about their day. But the most noticeable change was in him. His business partners noticed it too. In meetings, he laughed more. He was patient. He even turned down a few big deals, saying, "Some things aren't worth the cost." One afternoon, Clara found him sitting in the music room, watching Emily play for the house staff. Her fingers danced over the keys, her hair glowing in the sunlight. When she finished, everyone clapped. Emily bowed dramatically, pretending to be a grand pianist. Mr. Graves clapped too, his eyes glistening. Clara smiled at him quietly. "She's brought something special back, hasn't she?" He nodded. "She brought life," he said simply. That night, Emily sat beside him at dinner, swinging her legs under the chair. "Can I ask you something?" she said between bites of mashed potatoes. "Of course. Why were you so grumpy before?" He almost choked on his drink, then laughed. "Grumpy?" She nodded seriously. "Clara said before I came you didn't talk much or smile or play piano." He looked down at his plate, thoughtful. "I suppose I forgot how to be happy." "Why?" "Because I thought money could fill the quiet." He paused, looking at her. "But I was wrong. It only made it louder." Emily didn't fully understand, but she smiled anyway. "Well, I'll make sure you don't forget again." He laughed softly. "I believe you will." Later that evening, as Emily prepared for bed, she stood by the window looking at the stars. Mr. Graves came to say goodnight. "Do you miss your friends at the orphanage?" he asked gently. "Sometimes," she said, "but I think Mama would like it here. It's warm." He swallowed hard, his throat tightening. "Then I'll make sure it always stays that way." She smiled sleepily and whispered, "Good night, Mr. Graves. Good night, Emily," he said, brushing a strand of hair from her forehead before turning off the light. As he walked down the hall, he paused at the door, listening to her soft humming, the same melody she had played on his piano that first night. It was then he realized something profound, that in trying to change her life, she had changed his instead. The emptiness that had haunted him for years was gone. The echoing mansion finally felt like what he had forgotten it could be. It felt like home. The next morning, a golden light poured through the tall mansion windows. The piano room smelled faintly of polish and roses. the air still carrying traces of yesterday's laughter. Emily woke early, she always did, and tiptoed down the grand staircase in her slippers. When she reached the piano, she sat down and began to play softly. The melody was the same one she had learned from Mr. Graves, the tune called Home. Each note was like a whisper in the still morning air. She didn't notice that Mr. Graves was standing quietly in the doorway, listening with his hands tucked behind his back. He didn't interrupt her. He just watched. There was something about the way she played, the way her small fingers moved with such care, that made him feel something he hadn't felt since he was a child. Peace. Hadn't felt since he was a child. Peace. When she finished, she looked up and smiled shyly. "Did I wake you up?" He shook his head. "No," he said softly. "You woke something else instead. Something good." Emily laughed a little, not quite understanding, but liking the way he said it. "Come," he said. "Breakfast is waiting. Clara says you eat faster than anyone in the house." "I'm always hungry," she said proudly, and ran past him toward the dining room. Breakfast that morning was warm and cheerful. The table that once felt far too long for one man was now filled with conversation. Emily talked about her dreams, about the orphanage, about the stray cat she had seen near the gate. Mr. Graves listened, really listened, not like a busy man pretending to care, but like a father trying to learn every detail of his child's world. After breakfast, they sat in the garden. The autumn leaves were beginning to fall, painting the ground in gold and red. Emily chased a few of them, laughing as the wind carried them away. Mr. Graves watched her, smiling to himself. But beneath that smile, something stirred. A quiet fear. He had grown so used to being alone, so used to hiding behind his work, that this happiness felt fragile. He wondered if it could last. Later that afternoon, he received a visit from one of his oldest friends, Mr. Linton, a business partner known for his bluntness. "Alden," he said as they sat in the library, "I hear you've taken in a child. A little girl?" Mr. Graves nodded. "Her name is Emily." Linton raised an eyebrow. "That's unlike you. You've never been fond of, well, sentiment." Graves smirked slightly. "People change." "Maybe," Linton said, sipping his drink. "But be careful. You're not exactly suited for fatherhood." Mr. Graves frowned. "And what makes you think that?" Linton shrugged. "You're a businessman. A hard one. Children need softness. You've never had time for that." The word stung more than he expected. After Linton left, Mr. Graves sat alone in the quiet library, staring at the fireplace. He wasn't angry at his friend. He was angry because deep down part of it was true. He thought about Emily, her laughter, her trust, her innocent heart. Could he really give her the life she deserved? Or was he just trying to fill the silence of his own life with her light? He walked into the hallway where he heard the faint sound of music again. Emily was playing, her back straight, her feet swinging above the floor. The song was soft and imperfect, but it carried warmth. He leaned against the doorframe. "That's a new one," he said. Emily turned around, smiling. "I made it up. It's called Little Stars." He smiled faintly. "It's beautiful." She looked at him curiously. "Why do you look sad, Mr. Graves?" He paused. "I'm not sad, Emily, just thinking." "About business stuff?" He laughed quietly. "No, about life stuff." She tilted her head. "You think too much. Mama used to say when your head is too full, your heart gets quiet." Her words hit him harder than he expected. "Your mama was a wise woman." Emily nodded proudly. "She used to tell me stories." "Do you want to hear one?" He hesitated, then nodded. "I'd like that." And so she began telling him a story, a simple tale about a girl who found music in everything. In the rain, in footsteps, in the sound of her own heartbeat. Mr. Graves listened quietly, her voice soft and full of wonder. When she finished, she said, "It's not real, but I like to think maybe it could be." "It already is," he said. "You've made it real." That night, after Emily went to bed, Mr. Graves sat at the piano alone. He played Home again, slower this time, more tenderly. And as he played, he realized something. Linton was wrong. Maybe he wasn't the perfect guardian. Maybe he didn't know what a real family should look like. But he didn't need to. Emily wasn't looking for perfection. She was looking for love. And for the first time in decades, he knew he had some to give. The next morning, Emily woke to find a surprise. In the music room stood a brand new piano. smaller than the grand one but made just for her height. A silver plate on it read, "For Emily, who taught this house how to sing again." She gasped and ran to find him. "You bought it for me?" He smiled. "I didn't buy it. I gave it, there's a difference." She hugged him tightly and he froze for a second, unsurprised, awkward, but then slowly wrapped his arms around her. At that moment, something in both their hearts changed quietly but forever. For the first time, Emily truly felt she belonged. And for the first time, Mr. Graves realized that family isn't something you buy, inherit, or deserve. It's something you build, note by note, with love. The days that followed were peaceful, the kind of peace that comes only when two souls finally find where they belong. Emily had brought something alive into the mansion, laughter, light, and a kind of innocence that softened every corner of the house. Each morning she played the piano before breakfast. Sometimes cheerful, sometimes slow and thoughtful, her music seemed to speak to the house itself. The servants would pause to listen, their chores momentarily forgotten. Even the old butler, who had worked for Mr. Graves for more than 30 years, once muttered with a smile, "The house finally breathes again." Mr. Graves would often stand by the door, pretending to read a newspaper while quietly listening. He had grown fond of those mornings, the soft music, the smell of breakfast, the sense that he wasn't alone anymore, but that peace didn't last long. One afternoon, while Emily was drawing near the fireplace, the telephone rang. Mr. Graves answered. On the other end, his lawyer spoke in a serious tone. "Mr. Graves, there's an issue with the adoption papers. The court wants to review them again. Something about verification and suitability." Mr. Graves frowned. "Suitability?" "Yes, sir," the lawyer continued. "They're concerned about your past, the lack of family, your long history of solitude, and frankly, your reputation. They believe the child might be better off in a more stable emotional environment." He tightened his grip on the phone. "Stable? She is stable. She's happy here." "I understand, sir," the lawyer said gently, "but the officials will visit tomorrow to reevaluate." When he hung up, he felt anger and fear, emotions he wasn't used to. He had faced business crises, bankruptcies, and betrayals, but this was different. This wasn't about money or power. It was about Emily. He turned to find her watching him with curious eyes. "Is something wrong?" she asked. He forced a smile. "Nothing you need to worry about. But children can always sense the truth." That night, Emily couldn't sleep. She sneaked out of her room and tiptoed to the music hall. The moonlight poured through the tall windows, painting the piano in silver. She sat down and began to play, softly, carefully, as if she didn't want to wake the night. Mr. Graves, restless and unable to sleep himself, heard the faint melody from the corridor. When he entered the room, she looked up, startled. "I couldn't sleep," she whispered. "The piano helps." He smiled faintly and sat beside her. "It helps me too." For a while they didn't speak. The music filled the silence, fragile, beautiful, uncertain. After a few minutes, Emily stopped playing and looked up at him. "You're worried, aren't you?" He hesitated. "Yes," he admitted quietly. "They might take you away." She blinked. "Why, did I do something wrong?" He shook his head quickly. No, not you, it's me. They think I might not be good enough." Emily frowned, her small hands gripping his sleeve. "But you are good. You listen. You laugh. You let me play whenever I want." He smiled sadly. "Sometimes people don't see what's inside a person. They only see what they used to be." She thought for a moment, then said firmly, "Then I'll show them what I see." The next day, the officials arrived, 2 women and a man with serious faces and clipboards. They asked questions about Emily's daily routine, her meals, her studies. They spoke to the staff, took notes, and looked around every room. Finally, they asked Emily if she was happy there. She smiled shyly. "Yes, why?" the woman asked gently. "What do you like most about living here?" Emily glanced at Mr. Graves, who stood nervously by the door. "Because here I can play music and not be afraid," she said. "Because here I have someone who listens. He doesn't just hear the notes, he hears me." The room went quiet. The woman lowered her pen slowly, touched by the child's sincerity. Then, to everyone's surprise, Emily walked to the piano and said, "Can I show you something?" Without waiting for permission, she began to play Home, the same melody Mr. Graves had taught her. But this time, she played with new confidence, went soft, steady, and filled with emotion. When the last note faded, there were tears in more than one pair of eyes. Mr. Graves didn't move, afraid that even breathing too loudly would break the moment. Emily turned to the officials and said simply, "This house used to be sad. Now it's not." That evening, after the officials left, Mr. Graves stood on the balcony staring at the sunset. Emily came up beside him, holding 2 cups of cocoa. She handed him one. "Did they believe me?" she asked. He smiled. "I think they did," she nodded. "Good, because I meant it." He looked down at her, his chest tightening with emotion. "Emily, no matter what happens, you'll always have a home here. Even if the world says otherwise." She leaned her head against his arm. "Then I'm not scared." A week later, a letter arrived from the court. Mr. Graves opened it with trembling hands. At the top, in bold letters, were the words, "Adoption approved." He closed his eyes and let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. When he looked up, Emily was standing in the doorway, anxious and curious. "Well?" she asked softly. He smiled, tears glistening in his eyes. "You're officially mine, Emily." Her face lit up like sunlight breaking through clouds. She ran to him, wrapping her arms around his waist. "I told you they'd believe me," she said proudly. He laughed, his voice shaking. "Yes, you did." And as he held her close, he whispered something only she could hear. "You didn't just find a home, Emily, you made one." That night, the mansion was filled with music again, louder, brighter, happier than ever before. The sound of love, laughter, and belonging flowed through every room, carrying the melody of 2 hearts that had finally found each other. The years passed gently, like pages of a soft and beautiful song. The mansion, once cold and lifeless, now stood as a symbol of warmth and music. Every corner seemed to hum with life. Laughter in the kitchen, the sound of running feet on marble floors, and piano notes that floated through the air like morning sunlight. Emily had grown taller, her red hair longer, her smile even brighter. She still played the piano every morning, though her fingers now moved with confidence and grace. What was once a child's timid melody had turned into the touch of a true musician, each note full of emotion, maturity, and heart. Mr. Graves, now older and softer in his manner, sat beside her often. He didn't play as much anymore, but he loved to listen. The sound reminded him of how far they'd both come, how 2 lonely souls had found a family in the unlikeliest way. One evening, as the orange light of sunset filled the music room, Emily closed the piano lid gently and turned toward him. "Papa," she said softly. She had started calling him that a few years ago, and even now the word never failed to melt his heart. "Do you remember the first time I played here?" He smiled faintly. "I do. I also remember thinking a small girl had just ruined my party." Emily laughed. "And I remember thinking a grumpy old man was very rude." He chuckled, shaking his head. "You were brave that night. I didn't deserve it, but you played anyway." She sat beside him on the bench. "I didn't play for you back then. I played for Mama." "I know," he said. "And I'm glad you did. Because that song, it brought both of us home." For a moment, they sat quietly, watching the sunset through the tall glass windows. Dust motes floated lazily in the golden light, and the air smelled faintly of roses and wood polish, a scent that had come to mean peace. That night, the mansion hosted a small concert, Emily's first public performance. She was now 16, and her teacher had insisted she show the world her gift. The ballroom was filled with guests, some familiar faces, others strangers who had heard about the miracle girl adopted by the reclusive millionaire. Mr. Graves stood in the back of the room, wearing a modest suit. His heart pounded with pride and emotion. When Emily walked onto the stage, the crowd fell silent. She wore a simple white dress and carried the same quiet confidence she had as a child. She sat at the piano, took a deep breath, and began to play. The song she chose was her own composition, a piece she had been working on for months. She called it 2 Hearts. It began softly, almost like a whisper, a memory of loneliness and coldness. Then slowly, the melody warmed, growing stronger, brighter, filled with hope and connection. It was a story told through music, of loss and laughter, of pain and healing. By the time the final note faded into silence, tears shimmered in the eyes of nearly every listener. Mr. Graves clapped first, his hands trembling. The audience followed, standing to applaud. Emily turned toward him, smiling through her own tears. That look between them, proud, loving, full of understanding, was worth more than all the gold in his vaults. Later that night, when the guests had gone and the house was quiet again, Emily and Mr. Graves sat on the balcony under the stars. The city lights sparkled below like fallen constellations. "You played beautifully," he said. "Your mother would be proud." She leaned her head on his shoulder. "I think she'd be happy I found you." He smiled. "I think she helped you find me." They sat there for a long time, not needing to speak. The night air was calm and the world felt perfectly still. Years later, Emily became a well-known pianist. Her music carried emotion that touched hearts around the world, not the kind born from training or technique, but from truth. Every time she played, she poured into her songs the love and lessons she had learned from the man who once mocked her, but ended up saving her instead. And at every concert, in the front row sat Mr. Graves, older now, hair silver, eyes softer than ever. No matter how many people cheered for her, she always looked for him first. In one of her final concerts, she told the audience the story behind her success. "When I was a little girl," she said, her voice calm and steady, "a man once said he'd adopt me if I could play the piano. He was joking. But when I played, something changed in both of us. Music made strangers into family. It made an empty house into a home." The audience sat silent, moved beyond words. Then slowly, she turned to the piano and began to play, the same melody she had played as a child. Home. Each note shimmered like a memory of a frightened girl, a lonely man, a mocking challenge that became a promise. When the last note faded, Mr. Graves rose to his feet, clapping through tears. Emily looked at him and smiled, her eyes shining with gratitude and love. That night, as the stars watched over them, Emily whispered the same words her mother once told her. "Music isn't about notes. It's about what you feel when you play them." And beside her, Mr. Graves nodded, whispering softly, "And what you give when you share them." In that moment, the story that began with mockery ended with grace. Two hearts that healed each other through one simple truth. Sometimes, love doesn't find you in grand gestures or perfect people. Sometimes it begins with a single note, and the courage to play it.